"May I stay tonight?" the Apache girl whispered. The rancher hesitated. "So, where do I sleep?" A gentle wind whispered across the dry grass, carrying the scent of earth, sage, and distant mountains. The ranch, small but well kept, sat alone in the middle of this vast landscape. It was the kind of place where silence was normal, where the only sounds came from the animals, the wind, or the distant call of a bird. Life here was simple, predictable, and quiet. For the rancher, this quiet had always been comforting. He had grown used to it over the years, to the rhythm of his days. Feeding the animals, mending fences, checking the water supply, and sometimes simply sitting on his porch watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. On this evening he was finishing up the last of his chores. The horses had been fed, the chickens tucked safely into their coop, and the cows were settled in the barn. The rancher wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned against the wooden fence, taking a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of hay and dust, and for a moment everything felt as it always did, steady, calm, and predictable. But then he noticed something unusual, a movement far off near the edge of his property, where the open plains met a small line of trees and bushes. At first he thought it might be an animal, a deer, maybe, or one of the wild dogs that sometimes roam the outskirts. But as he watched more closely, he realized it was something else entirely. A young girl stood there, small and thin, with dark hair falling across her shoulders and wide, cautious eyes. She seemed almost too small to be standing out there alone, and yet she was. There was something about her that made the rancher pause. She didn't run when he called out, didn't hide behind the trees. She simply stood there looking at him, a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. Her clothes were simple, a little worn but clean, and she carried nothing with her except a small bundle that she held close to her chest. She seemed fragile in the vastness of the land, like a delicate flower growing in the desert. The rancher stepped closer, squinting against the setting sun. His heart beat a little faster, not out of fear but out of curiosity. He had lived alone on this ranch for many years, and in all that time, he had rarely seen another human being apart from the occasional neighbor or passing traveler. And yet, there she was, standing quietly at the edge of his property. Finally, in a voice that was soft but steady, she spoke. "May I stay tonight?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet clear and polite. The rancher froze. He was not used to visitors, especially not unexpected ones, especially not children he had never met before. He hesitated, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to ask questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she here? But another part of him simply wanted to help, to reach out to this small, scared girl who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He swallowed and tried to find the right words. "So, where do you sleep?" he asked finally, his voice rough from years of talking to no one but himself and the animals. The girl blinked, looking down at her feet. She seemed unsure, almost embarrassed. She had expected this question maybe, but she had not known how to answer it. Her eyes flicked toward the small cabin that stood at the center of the ranch, simple but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney. I don't have anywhere," she said softly. Her words were careful, chosen not to demand, not to scare, but simply to explain. She looked back at him, her eyes wide and earnest, and he could see the fear behind them. She was alone, lost, and unsure of what would happen next. The rancher ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was a man who lived by routine, who knew the land and its animals better than he knew people. Yet here was a child, asking for shelter in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. He thought of the desert beyond the ranch, where temperatures dropped fast at night, and where a young girl could easily get lost or hurt. The thought made him shiver. He could not simply turn her away. Slowly he nodded, motioning for her to come closer. "All right," he said. "You can stay tonight, but you have to come this way." He led her down a narrow path toward the main cabin, the soft earth muffling their footsteps. The girl followed quietly, clutching her small bundle tightly. She didn't speak much, only once glancing up and offering a shy thank you. The rancher nodded in return, his mind still turning over questions about who she was and where she had come from. As they walked, the rancher noticed the subtle signs of a long journey. Her clothes were worn from travel, her shoes dusty and scratched. Her hair had small tangles, and her eyes carried a weariness that seemed far beyond her years. Yet there was also something strong about her, something that suggested she had survived challenges and hardships that most children her age had never faced. He could see the mixture of fear and determination in her expression, and he realized that this girl had a story to tell, a life he knew nothing about. When they reached the cabin, he showed her the small guest room he kept for visitors. It was modest, a single bed with a thin blanket, a small wooden table and a chair. Nothing fancy but clean and safe. "This will be your room tonight," he said. The girl stepped inside and looked around, her eyes lighting up slightly at the warmth of the place. She did not speak, but her small nod was enough to show her gratitude. The rancher watched her for a moment, standing silently in the doorway. He had expected hesitation, perhaps even fear, but she seemed to accept the offer with quiet dignity. He realized how unusual it was, this simple act of trust between two strangers. He thought about how many times he had gone through his days alone, never realizing how much a small connection could matter. And now, here it was, unexpected and fragile but real. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the land, the rancher brought a simple meal for the girl: bread, cheese, and a little stew he had prepared earlier. She ate quietly, occasionally glancing up at him, her eyes curious but cautious. He did not pressure her to talk, did not demand her story. Instead, he simply sat nearby, sharing the space without intrusion. There was a silence between them, but it was a comfortable one, filled with the quiet understanding that they were both alone in their own ways. After the meal, the rancher returned to his own small routine, checking the animals one last time before heading inside. The girl stayed in the room, unpacking her small bundle and arranging her few belongings neatly. Though tired, she did not rest immediately. Instead, she looked out the window at the fading light, watching the sky change colors as the stars began to appear. She thought of her family, of the journey she had been forced to take, and of the strange kindness of this man who had offered her shelter without knowing her at all. That night the rancher lay awake in his own bed, listening to the sounds of the night. The soft breathing of the girl in the other room, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of the wind through the grass. He thought about how life could change in a single moment, how a quiet evening could turn into an encounter that neither of them would forget. He realized that trust, kindness, and compassion were not just words. They were actions, sometimes small, sometimes quiet, but powerful in ways that mattered most. Meanwhile, the girl finally lay down on the bed in the guest room, pulling the blanket around her. For the first time in many days, she felt a sense of safety. She did not know what tomorrow would bring or where her journey would take her next, but for this one night, she was not alone. She was in a place where someone had cared enough to open their home and heart, and that small act of kindness gave her hope. The night passed slowly, the silence of the desert around them holding both of them in a gentle embrace. Two strangers from very different worlds had crossed paths and found a brief moment of connection. And in that connection, both of them felt a little less alone, a little more understood, and a little more ready to face whatever the future might hold. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, spilling golden light across the wide plains and glinting off the barn's roof. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dew and wild grass. Inside the cabin, the rancher stirred from his sleep, stretching his stiff arms and yawning. The previous night had been unlike any other he had experienced in years. The presence of the young Apache girl, quiet and respectful, had left an impression on him. He had spent countless nights alone in this cabin, listening to the same sounds, seeing the same skies. But last night had been different. For the first time in a long while, he had felt the subtle warmth of companionship, even if it was only temporary. Down the hall, the girl was awake as well. She had slept more soundly than she expected, her exhaustion from travel finally giving way to the safety of the small room. Still, she lay for a few moments staring at the ceiling, gathering her thoughts and trying to remember the last time she had felt this safe. Her journey had been long, filled with uncertainty and small fears, each step testing her resolve. Yet here she was, welcomed into a stranger's home with no judgment or suspicion. The contrast between the harshness of the desert outside and the warmth of the cabin within was almost surreal to her. Slowly, she rose, careful not to make a sound, and began to arrange her few belongings neatly before heading to the small window to look outside. The rancher had already moved quietly into the kitchen. He was preparing a simple breakfast, eggs from the coop, some bread, and a little fresh fruit he kept from his modest garden. Cooking for himself had become routine, mechanical even, but today, the act felt different. He was preparing food for another person, and not just any person, a young girl who had entrusted him with her safety. The thought made him feel a strange mix of responsibility and connection. He wondered how she had managed to survive alone until now, and what stories her eyes might hold if she chose to tell them. Eventually, the girl appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes and offering a shy smile. "Good morning," she whispered. Her voice was soft, melodic in a way that carried a hint of the land she came from, of mountains and rivers, sun and wind. The rancher returned the greeting, nodding silently before gesturing toward the small table. "Breakfast is ready," he said simply. She moved to the table, still holding her bundle close to her chest, and he watched as she began to eat. They did not speak much at first. The girl was cautious, feeling out the boundaries of this new environment, while the rancher was unsure how to begin a conversation. In the silence, he observed her closely. The way she held herself, careful yet poised, the intensity in her eyes both curious and wary, the small gestures like tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear that suggested a quiet resilience. It was clear to him that she had endured much in her young life, yet she carried herself with dignity and strength. He felt a mixture of admiration and a deep desire to protect her, though he knew he could not solve all the challenges she faced. Finally, he broke the silence. "Where are you from?" he asked gently, trying to keep his tone neutral, not wanting to scare her. The girl paused, considering her answer. She was used to guarding her story, to speaking only in fragments when trust had not yet been earned. But there was something in the rancher's voice, steady and calm, that made her willing to share a little. "I live not far from here," she said carefully, "with my family, but I got separated, I lost my way." Her words were slow, deliberate, and honest. The rancher nodded, understanding the gravity hidden in such simple statements. As she spoke, he realized how little he knew about the world outside his ranch. He had lived a life mostly confined to these plains, relying on routines and familiarity. The girl's presence reminded him that life was bigger than his farm, bigger than his own small experiences. He began to ask gentle questions, not pressing for details she was uncomfortable giving, but curious enough to encourage her to speak. "How did you get here?" he asked. "Did something happen along the way?" She hesitated, frowning slightly as she remembered the hardships of her journey. "It was difficult," she admitted quietly. "The desert is lonely. The nights are cold and the days are hot. I tried to follow the paths I knew, but sometimes the paths disappear. I didn't have food for a long time, and I walked until my feet hurt so badly I didn't know how I would keep going." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not cry. The rancher listened intently, realizing the courage it had taken for her to make it this far. He felt a deep sense of respect for her bravery. Over breakfast, they began to exchange small stories. The rancher shared bits of his own life, not the painful parts, not the lonely nights or difficult years, but small glimpses that could build trust. He told her about the animals on the ranch, how each one had its own personality, and how he came to care for them as companions as much as livestock. He spoke of the sunsets and the mountains, of the beauty in the quiet land around him. The girl listened, her eyes lighting up with interest at times, occasionally asking questions that showed her curiosity and intelligence. In turn, she spoke of her community, of the traditions her family valued, and the ways she had been taught to respect the land and nature. She mentioned the songs they sang, the stories passed down from elders, and the lessons learned through observation and experience. The rancher found himself captivated by the simplicity and depth of her life, a stark contrast to his own, yet somehow complementary. It was a quiet exchange, a slow unfolding of understanding and connection, but it carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. As the morning turned to afternoon, the rancher decided to show her the ranch more thoroughly. He led her out to the barn, pointing out each animal and explaining its habits and quirks. She watched the horses with fascination, stroking their soft manes and asking questions about how they were trained. She laughed when one of the younger animals nipped gently at her hand, and the sound was like music to the rancher's ears. He realized how much he had missed simple human interaction, how rare and valuable it was to see someone so genuinely curious and engaged with the world. After the barn, they walked the length of the property together. The girl marveled at the wide-open spaces, the mountains in the distance, and the endless sky above. She told him about the places she had traveled, the paths she had walked, and the small challenges she had overcome alone. The rancher listened quietly, offering encouragement without judgment, admiration without condescension. The trust between them grew naturally, like the slow, steady flow of a river carving its path through the land. By late afternoon, they returned to the cabin, both feeling the warmth of shared experience. The rancher prepared a simple snack, and the girl helped in small ways, learning from him and observing the care he put into his work. Their conversation continued, flowing naturally from one topic to another: animals, food, the beauty of the land, the small joys and struggles of life. It was a conversation that felt effortless, built on mutual respect and curiosity. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the girl grew quiet, thoughtful. She had shared more than she usually did, yet she still held back pieces of her story, choosing carefully what to reveal and what to keep to herself. The rancher noticed this and respected it. He realized that trust was not something to be forced, but something that developed gradually, over time, and through small acts of kindness. He felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that he had earned some of that trust, even in the short time they had spent together. That evening they shared a meal together, similar to the night before, but this time the atmosphere was more relaxed, warmer and comfortable. The girl laughed more freely, the rancher smiled more easily, and for a brief time the walls of the cabin seemed to expand, holding their shared presence like a protective embrace. Neither of them spoke of the dangers outside, the loneliness that often accompanied life on the plains, or the uncertainty of what would come next. For now, it was enough to exist in this small bubble of safety, companionship, and understanding. As night fell, the girl prepared for bed once again, feeling a sense of peace she had not known for days. The rancher checked on her briefly, making sure she had what she needed, and then returned to his own room. The stars outside were bright and countless, the sky stretching endlessly above the quiet land. Both of them lay awake for a while, thinking of their lives, their challenges, and the unexpected bond that had formed between them. It was a quiet reflection, a moment of connection without words, a mutual recognition of courage, kindness, and the small acts that made life meaningful. By the end of the night, both the rancher and the girl had changed in subtle but important ways. The rancher had been reminded of the value of compassion and trust, of the impact a small act of kindness could have. The girl had been reassured that safety and understanding could exist, even in a world that often seemed harsh and unpredictable. Together, they had begun to bridge the gap between two very different worlds, finding common ground in respect, empathy, and the simple human need for connection. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and lighting the room in a soft golden glow. Outside, the desert air carried a gentle warmth, and the faint sound of birdsong drifted across the plains. The rancher awoke early, as he always did, moving with the quiet rhythm of someone used to long, solitary mornings. But today, there was an energy he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond routine chores. The girl had been staying at the ranch for only a short while, yet her presence had already brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was as though her quiet courage and curiosity had awakened something in him that had lain dormant for years. Down the hall, the girl stirred in her small guest room. She had slept deeply, the fatigue of the past days finally catching up to her, and for the first time in a long while she had not woken in fear or discomfort. She rubbed her eyes and stretched her arms, glancing around the room she now called her own, even if only temporarily. The simplicity of the space, the soft bed, and the quiet calm of the morning made her heart feel lighter. She had spent so many nights in uncertainty, on hard ground or under open skies, that this small comfort felt like a miracle. Slowly she rose and approached the window, looking out over the wide expanse of plains, the distant mountains glowing in the early light. The rancher had already moved into the kitchen, preparing breakfast as he did every morning. Eggs sizzled on the pan, bread warmed in the small oven, and he poured water from the jug into a clean glass for her. The act of preparing food for someone else, someone he had only just met, felt surprisingly natural now. It was a small gesture, yet it carried weight, care, attention, and a recognition of another life that mattered. When the girl entered the kitchen, she offered him a quiet smile, and he nodded in return. They ate together in companionable silence, the only sounds being the soft clinking of utensils and the occasional sigh of the wind outside. After breakfast, the rancher decided it was time to show her more of the ranch. He wanted her to understand the land, the work involved, and the life he had built here. They walked first to the barn, where the animals greeted them with soft noises, horses neighing, cows lowing, and chickens clucking in excitement. The girl's eyes widened as she approached each animal, her fingers brushing over soft fur and manes with careful curiosity. She laughed softly when a young horse nudged her gently, and the rancher smiled at the sound, noting how rare it was to hear such pure joy. For him, this simple interaction was more meaningful than any words. They were sharing a moment of trust and connection without needing to speak. As they moved from one section of the ranch to another, the rancher began to explain the routines he followed each day. He told her about the animals' feeding schedules, the importance of keeping the fences strong, and the small but critical details that kept the ranch running smoothly. She listened intently, asking questions at times, and sometimes offering insights from her own experiences. Her curiosity was genuine, her intelligence evident, and the rancher found himself increasingly impressed by her resilience. It was clear that, despite her youth, she had learned to navigate challenges with patience and careful thought. They spent hours walking the property, stopping occasionally to rest under the shade of a lone tree. The girl shared stories of the landscape she had known, descriptions of the desert trails, the hills, and the small streams where she had once played. Her voice carried both nostalgia and pride, and the rancher felt honored that she was willing to share pieces of her life with him. In turn, he told her about the ways he had learned to survive in isolation, about the knowledge of the land he had gathered over years of observation, and about the quiet satisfaction that came from working in harmony with nature. It was a slow, careful exchange of experiences, and yet it created a bridge between two worlds that might otherwise have remained separate. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they returned to the cabin for a light lunch. The girl helped prepare the meal, chopping vegetables and arranging them neatly on a plate. The rancher watched her work with a mixture of admiration and surprise. She had a natural ease, a sense of rhythm in her movements, and a quiet focus that reminded him of the dedication required to survive in a harsh environment. He realized that there was more to her than the fragility he had first perceived. She was strong, resourceful, and thoughtful, a combination that made her presence all the more remarkable. After lunch, they sat on the porch, watching the animals graze and the desert stretch endlessly before them. The girl asked questions about the stars and the mountains, about how the rancher had learned to predict the weather and understand the land. He answered patiently, sharing stories of trial and error, of mistakes made and lessons learned, and she listened with wide eyes, absorbing each detail with a mixture of awe and respect. In these moments, words were not just communication. They were a way to connect, to understand each other, and to build trust. The afternoon passed slowly, filled with small, meaningful interactions. The rancher showed her how to mend a fence, explaining the importance of each step, and she followed his instructions carefully, determined to do it correctly. When a small mistake occurred, she corrected it without complaint, learning from the experience rather than being discouraged. The rancher found himself silently impressed, realizing that she had already endured hardships that had taught her patience, adaptability, and resilience. Each small task became a lesson not only in ranch work but in life, and the bond between them grew stronger with each shared moment. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, the girl grew quiet, lost in thought. She reflected on her journey so far, on the days spent wandering and the nights filled with uncertainty, and on the strange, comforting presence of the rancher who had welcomed her without question. She realized that this temporary shelter had given her more than safety. It had given her a sense of belonging, even if only for a short time. The rancher, meanwhile, noticed her contemplative silence and respected it, understanding that sometimes the mind needed to process experiences without interruption. That evening, they shared a meal together again, simple but nourishing. The girl spoke more freely than she had in the past days, sharing small anecdotes from her childhood and the lessons she had learned from her family. The rancher listened, offering gentle encouragement and sometimes asking questions that prompted her to elaborate. He was careful not to pry too deeply, recognizing that trust was built slowly and could be easily damaged. Through these small exchanges, they began to understand each other on a deeper level, not just as visitor and host, but as two people learning to connect despite the differences in their worlds. After dinner, the rancher suggested they take a short walk outside before night fell completely. They moved quietly across the open plains, the stars beginning to appear in the deepening sky. The girl paused at times to gaze at the constellations, sharing the stories she had learned from her community about the stars and their significance. The rancher listened intently, fascinated by the richness of her culture and the wisdom embedded in simple stories. It was a moment of shared wonder, a reminder that even in vast, open spaces, connection and understanding could thrive. When they returned to the cabin, the girl prepared for bed, placing her few belongings neatly and pulling the blanket around her. The rancher checked on her briefly, ensuring she had what she needed, and then returned to his own room. That night, both of them lay awake for a while, reflecting on the day's events. The girl thought about the kindness of the rancher, the security she felt, and the knowledge that someone cared for her safety. The rancher, in turn, thought about the girl's courage, resilience, and the way she had enriched his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. They both recognized that this connection, fragile as it might be, was meaningful and real. Before sleep finally claimed them, the girl whispered a quiet thank you to herself, feeling gratitude not just for the safety provided, but for the understanding and companionship that had grown between them. The rancher, listening to the quiet night, felt a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't known he had been missing. He realized that life, even in isolation, was richer when shared with someone who could inspire trust, courage, and reflection. And in that quiet desert night, two strangers had found not only shelter but also a beginning, a foundation of understanding, respect, and subtle, enduring friendship. Night fell slowly over the ranch, the sky turning deep blue and dotted with countless stars that shimmered like tiny lanterns hanging in the heavens. The desert air had cooled, carrying a crisp freshness that hinted at the coming hours of stillness and quiet. Inside the cabin, the rancher moved softly through the rooms, finishing small chores that needed attention before sleep. The animals were settled, the doors securely closed, and the faint smell of cooking still lingered in the air. He paused for a moment by the window, looking out over the wide plains, the mountains dark silhouettes against the star-studded sky. The night was peaceful, yet his mind was anything but still. He thought about the young Apache girl who had arrived just a few days ago. Her presence had shifted the rhythm of his life in subtle ways he hadn't anticipated. He remembered the look in her eyes when she first asked to stay, the mixture of fear and hope, and he realized how deeply that single moment had affected him. For years, he had lived alone, trusting only the land and the animals he cared for. But now he found himself thinking about someone else's safety, someone else's well-being, and how fragile life could be for someone so young. The thought stirred a mix of emotions in him, concern, admiration, and an unexpected warmth. Meanwhile, the girl lay on the small bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Her mind wandered through the events of the day, replaying the conversations, the laughter, and the small lessons she had learned about life on the ranch. She thought about the kindness of the rancher, the patience he had shown, and the quiet strength that seemed to surround him like a shield. She realized that this temporary shelter had provided more than safety. It had given her a sense of trust, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. For so long, she had navigated the world with caution, expecting challenges and hardship at every turn. But here, in this cabin, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As she looked out the window, the stars seemed closer than ever, their light spilling across the desert in a soft, silver glow. She remembered the nights on the trail, sleeping under the open sky, the cold seeping into her bones, the loneliness pressing down like a heavy weight. Those nights had been long and difficult, filled with uncertainty and fear. And yet, despite it all, she had kept moving, kept going, driven by the hope of finding safety in someone who could understand her. Now, lying in this bed, she realized that hope had not been in vain. The rancher moved quietly through the cabin, finally settling into his own room. He lay on his bed, listening to the gentle breathing of the girl in the other room. The sound was comforting, a reminder that she was safe and at peace, at least for now. His mind wandered, reflecting on his own life, the years of solitude, the routine that had defined him, and the emptiness that had sometimes accompanied it. He realized that the girl's presence had brought a subtle change, a sense of purpose and connection he hadn't known he needed. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he mattered to someone beyond himself, and that small realization filled him with a quiet satisfaction. Outside, the desert night was alive in subtle ways. The wind whispered through the grasses, carrying distant sounds of nocturnal creatures moving softly across the plains. The moon had risen, casting a pale glow over the landscape, illuminating the contours of the mountains and the stretches of land that seemed to go on forever. The rancher imagined the girl outside, alone in such a vast place, and shivered at the thought. He was grateful that she was here, that she had chosen to trust him, and that he could offer her shelter and protection. It was a heavy thought, one that reminded him of the fragility of life, but also of its potential for kindness and connection. Meanwhile, the girl turned onto her side, hugging the small blanket closer around her. Her thoughts drifted to her family, the people she had left behind, and the journey that had brought her here. She wondered if they were worried, if they missed her as much as she missed them. She thought about the path she had walked, the challenges she had faced, and the small victories she had achieved along the way. Despite the hardships, she felt proud of herself. She had survived, had found her way to safety, and had earned the trust of a stranger, a trust that was not given lightly. As the hours passed, both the rancher and the girl reflected quietly on the day's experiences. The rancher thought about her courage, her resilience, and her ability to adapt to challenges with calm determination. He realized that life had lessons to teach, sometimes in the most unexpected ways, and that meeting her had reminded him of the value of empathy, patience, and understanding. The girl, in turn, thought about the rancher's kindness, the way he had listened without judgment, and the small gestures that had made her feel safe and respected. She realized that people could be compassionate, that trust could exist even in a world that often seemed harsh, and that connection could be formed in the simplest of ways. At one point during the night, the rancher quietly rose from his bed and walked to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water and looked out the window again. The stars sparkled above, vast and infinite, and the desert stretched endlessly before him. He thought about the small, fragile bond he had formed with the girl, and he realized how rare and valuable such a connection could be. Life had a way of surprising him, of presenting moments of meaning when he least expected them. And this simple act of offering shelter, of sharing space, of listening and understanding, felt like one of those rare moments. Back in her room, the girl finally drifted into sleep, her thoughts slowly fading into dreams. In her dreams, she walked across the desert with confidence, guided by the kindness she had experienced, the trust she had earned, and the quiet knowledge that she was not alone. She dreamed of returning to her family one day, of sharing the stories she had gathered, and of carrying forward the lessons she had learned in this small, isolated cabin. For the first time in many nights, her sleep was peaceful, filled with hope and possibility rather than fear and uncertainty. The rancher, still awake for a while longer, reflected on the quiet night and the unexpected lessons it had brought. He thought about his own life, the years spent in solitude and the routine that had defined him. He realized that he had often underestimated the power of human connection, the small gestures that could change someone's world, and the way trust and kindness could transform both the giver and the receiver. The girl had reminded him that life was not just about survival, but about understanding, empathy, and the bonds that could form even in the most unlikely of circumstances. As the hours of darkness passed, both of them slept and woke intermittently, their minds wandering through memories, hopes, and reflections. The rancher considered the responsibility he now held, the importance of guiding, protecting, and teaching the girl as she stayed on the ranch. The girl, in turn, considered the lessons she had learned, the trust she had earned, and the courage that had carried her this far. In the quiet night, they both understood in their own ways the fragile beauty of life and the small but meaningful ways in which it could be shared. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the rancher and the girl were already stirring, each in their own space, each reflecting on the night that had passed. Though silent, their minds were aligned in a shared understanding of trust, compassion, and the quiet bonds that could form between two strangers. It was a night of reflection, of growth, and of emotional connection that neither of them would forget. They had learned from each other in ways both subtle and profound, and the experience had left them both changed, quietly but undeniably. The girl dressed and prepared for the day, feeling more confident, more grounded, and more secure than she had in days. The rancher observed her, noticing the small changes, the steadiness in her movements, the calm in her eyes, and the gentle pride she carried. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had been able to provide not just shelter, but a sense of safety, understanding, and emotional support. In that moment, both of them recognized the small miracle of trust and connection, and the way it could quietly transform lives, even in the most isolated of places. As they shared breakfast, there was a sense of quiet understanding between them. Words were fewer now, but the meaning behind each glance, each gesture, was clear. They had shared a night of reflection, had considered the fragility of life and the strength required to navigate it, and had come through with a deeper understanding of each other. The rancher knew that the girl's journey was far from over, and the girl understood that the kindness she had received was rare and valuable. Together, they had experienced a night that would leave an indelible mark on both of their lives, a night of learning, growth, and quiet transformation under the endless desert sky. The morning light spilled over the horizon, soft and golden, illuminating the ranch in a quiet glow. The desert seemed alive with gentle warmth, the air carrying the faint scent of dry grass and distant mountains. Birds chirped softly in the early hours, and the faint rustle of leaves added to the calm serenity of the scene. Inside the cabin, the rancher moved slowly, completing the morning chores with his usual care, but today there was a difference. The presence of the young Apache girl had transformed the quiet routine of the ranch. Her laughter, curiosity, and gentle spirit had left an impression on him that he could not ignore. The girl was awake as well, sitting quietly by the window. She watched the horizon, the mountains, and the endless plains stretching far beyond the ranch. Her thoughts wandered to the past days, to the journey that had brought her here, and to the unexpected kindness she had found. She had faced many challenges and hardships, yet in this brief period she had discovered trust, safety, and understanding. For a young girl who had often felt isolated and uncertain, these small gifts were immeasurable. She felt a quiet strength within herself, a sense of courage she had not known she possessed. After a simple breakfast, the rancher and the girl stepped outside together. The air was crisp, the sky painted with the soft colors of morning, and the ranch seemed alive with possibility. The animals stirred in the fields, and the soft sounds of the desert morning created a peaceful backdrop for the unfolding day. The rancher watched the girl, noting the quiet determination in her movements and the thoughtful way she observed her surroundings. He realized how much she had grown, even in the short time she had been at the ranch. The journey had been difficult, yet she had faced it with courage, grace, and a quiet resilience that inspired him. They walked together across the property, exchanging small observations about the land, the animals, and the beauty of the early morning. The girl asked questions about the rancher's life, about the choices he had made, and about the way he had learned to navigate a life of solitude. He answered patiently, sharing insights from his own experiences, sometimes with gentle humor and sometimes with quiet reflection. Each exchange, each small story strengthened the bond between them, building a foundation of respect, trust, and mutual understanding. As the morning turned to afternoon, the rancher and the girl returned to the cabin. The girl helped with small tasks, feeding the animals, tidying the cabin, and preparing simple food for lunch. These moments, though ordinary, were rich with meaning. They were teaching moments, shared experiences, and opportunities for connection. The rancher noticed the way she approached each task with care, focus, and a quiet confidence that spoke volumes about her character. He felt proud of her, not in a way that diminished her independence, but in recognition of her strength and determination. After lunch, the rancher and the girl sat together on the porch, watching the vast plains and the distant mountains. They spoke less now, comfortable in each other's presence, enjoying the quiet companionship that had grown over the past days. The girl reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the hardships she had endured, and the lessons she had learned. She realized that she had grown stronger, more resilient, and more capable of facing the challenges ahead. The rancher, in turn, thought about the ways in which her presence had changed him, reminding him of the value of trust, kindness, and human connection. As the day progressed, the girl knew that it would soon be time to continue her journey. She had learned much from the rancher, gained confidence in her abilities, and found a sense of security she had not known for days. Yet the thought of leaving brought a mixture of emotions: gratitude for the care she had received, sadness at leaving a place of safety, and hope for the path ahead. The rancher, sensing her thoughts, did not press for words. Instead, he respected the quiet, understanding that farewells were never easy, even in the simplest of circumstances. Finally, the moment arrived. The girl gathered her few belongings, arranging them neatly in her small bundle. She looked at the rancher, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a hint of sadness. He watched her carefully, feeling the weight of the connection they had shared, the bond formed through shared experiences, trust, and quiet understanding. There was a moment of silence, both recognizing the significance of this parting. Though brief, their time together had been transformative, leaving an imprint on each of their lives that neither would forget. The girl spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she said simply, yet with depth that conveyed the gratitude, respect, and trust she felt. "For everything, for keeping me safe, for teaching me, and for listening." The rancher nodded, feeling the sincerity in her words. He replied with a quiet warmth, "You are welcome. Remember what you've learned here, trust yourself, and keep moving forward." They stood together for a moment, sharing a silent understanding that spoke louder than words ever could. Before leaving, the girl turned to glance at the ranch one last time. The cabin, the animals, the wide plains, and the mountains beyond, all of it had become part of her journey, a place that had offered shelter, guidance, and understanding. She felt a sense of connection not only to the rancher but also to the land itself, to the quiet rhythms of life that had nurtured her in unexpected ways. The rancher watched her, feeling a mix of pride, sadness, and hope. He knew that she would continue her journey with courage, carrying the lessons she had learned and the kindness she had experienced. As she walked toward the path leading away from the ranch, the girl moved with confidence, each step deliberate and steady. She glanced back once, offering a small smile, and the rancher returned it. Though the distance between them grew with every step, the bond they had formed remained strong, a quiet reminder of the power of trust, kindness, and human connection. The rancher felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had been able to offer safety, guidance, and understanding to someone who had needed it. The girl, walking toward an uncertain future, carried the strength, hope, and confidence nurtured during her stay. Throughout the day, both the rancher and the girl reflected on their time together. The rancher thought about the ways in which her presence had enriched his life, reminding him of the value of compassion, patience, and human connection. The girl considered the lessons she had learned, the trust she had earned, and the courage that had carried her to this point. Both of them recognized that, despite the brevity of their time together, their shared experiences had left a lasting impact, shaping the way they would face the future. By evening, the girl had disappeared from view, moving steadily along the path that would take her to her family and the next stage of her journey. The rancher returned to the cabin, standing for a moment on the porch and gazing at the sunset. The sky was painted with deep reds, oranges, and purples, reflecting the beauty and vastness of the world around him. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of peace that came from knowing he had been able to provide shelter, guidance, and understanding. Though the girl was gone, the experience remained, a reminder of the enduring power of kindness and connection. That night, the rancher reflected on the past days, the challenges faced, and the quiet moments of growth, trust, and understanding. He realized that life was richer when shared, even in small ways, and that human connection could transform both the giver and the receiver. He thought about the girl, her courage, her resilience, and the lessons she had brought to his life. And in the stillness of the desert night, he felt a quiet hope for her journey, for the future, and for the unexpected ways in which life could bring two strangers together. Meanwhile, the girl, resting under a star-filled sky along her journey, carried with her the memories of the ranch, the kindness of the rancher, and the quiet lessons of trust, patience, and courage. She felt a renewed sense of strength, a confidence in her ability to face challenges, and a deep understanding of the value of human connection. Though the path ahead was uncertain, she walked with determination, hope, and the knowledge that kindness could exist even in the most unlikely of places. The story closes with the rancher watching the horizon, the land quiet and peaceful once more, reflecting on the brief but meaningful connection they had shared. The girl moved forward on her journey, strengthened by the safety, trust, and understanding she had experienced. Both carried a piece of each other's lives with them, a reminder that even short encounters could leave lasting impressions, shaping hearts, minds, and the courage to continue onward. And so, under the vast, open sky, two lives had intertwined, leaving a legacy of trust, empathy, and the quiet beauty of human kindness.